How do you plan your life? This is always a question that people ask. What are you going to do? What's the next step? I had an interesting question today. Someone asked me if you could change anything in your life, what would you change? If you could have a different career, what would you have chosen? And I was a bit embarrassed, to be quite honest, because I'm doing absolutely what I love. I teach and I write and I philosophize. Life could not be much better for a person like me. I wouldn't change anything from where I am right now. But of course, I have along the way hurt people, I'm sure. I've made some bad investments financially. But as to a career, we could all have had a different career, but those careers would have produced a different human being. And I question whether some of them would have made me as happy as I am, whatever that means. So the question becomes, how do you plan your life? Well, I think at the very beginning, when you gain consciousness, because this is an unfair question to someone who's young, 16, 18 years old, but when you come to full consciousness, let's say at 20 or in that range, 2021, I think the very, very first thing a person must do, if you're serious about planning your life, and many people are not, of course, but if you are serious, you must sit in silence for a protracted period of time. And you don't have to necessarily sit, but you need to go for a very long walk alone and have a chat with yourself. And I believe with God, if you possibly can have that form of communication. You need to have a partner in your life. God, Gaia, or the universe. You can describe that being in the way you want. But I believe there is this force, and it will be your friend along the way. You need to have that conversation and ask, what should I do? And then listen. Listen to your inner heart. And your heart will tell you what you should do, what you should undertake. Then, after you have that walk, and that walk has given you a sense of peace. I had that walk when I was about 18 or 19 years old. And I never forgot it, for whatever it was worth. I never forgot that conversation. Now, the conversation does not tell you, at least it didn't tell me, you must become a sailor, a lawyer, a candlestick maker. It wasn't that kind of conversation. The conversation was, you should believe in the decisions that you make. When they're planned out, believe in you. So, to do that, obviously we need a notebook. We need a notebook to write down our plans. And then we're off, aren't we? We're going to follow what we believe to be correct. Now, you could go along for a while, and you could discover that the plan that you believed was for you was actually the wrong plan. And you had to change and take on a different direction. In my case, for instance, for a long time I believed I should be a businessman, but that ultimately was not my calling. I did well with it, but it was not what my heart said I should do, ultimately. And I was fortunate to go to a different place and start on the career which I'm presently undertaking. And I think we're all like this. We push on in a certain direction, and it might be not the career for me. I often like to tell the story of my friend Hubert and his calling. Initially, he thought was to become a doctor. The first year was wonderful, but the second year they brought in the cadavers and he had to work on the cadavers. Now, I've never been exposed to a cadaver in a medical situation, but I'm told and I've read that there is a tinge, there is a smell of formaldehyde because they have to obviously be preserved from decay. And when they are cut, this preservative can come out. There's a liquid that comes out. And my poor friend, this made him nauseous and he got sick. And the professor, of course, says this is something that happens and you get sick for the first time, but you will get used to this. But he never did. And after about 2 or 3 weeks, a month, whatever, he finally left. He quit. He left the medical practice, and his family, his father in particular, were just horrified. I think as anyone's father would be. My son is going to be successful as a doctor. It was not to be, and his father probably never forgave him, quite honestly. But my friend eventually went back to school and got a PhD in music, which was his first love. So there we are. He eventually ended up doing what he was called to do. But it wasn't an easy transition, as it is not an easy transition for many people. So obviously, you need a plan. And with that plan, there must be points in that plan that it leads you to where you want to go. And I think many people say that you should constantly review your plan to see if you're on track. And this is where the notebook, once again, is extremely important because it's not a diary and not a journal. This is where you're putting your spontaneous thoughts. Because if you're on the right plan, on the right path, you're going to find that you're totally energized along the way and you're filled with these ideas and these thoughts and these contacts. So exciting. Truly. For instance, David and I are going to go on the Matsu Walk in the next couple of weeks. And last summer we walked the Camino. And all of this is part of the plan to get out and spread the message. And so the plan has derivations. Certainly the Camino walk wasn't planned 10 years ago, let's say. It presented itself a number of years ago. The Matsu Walk also was not planned, but it's presented itself in this year. But the plan to continue with the mission of critical thinking and talking about time is the larger plan that encapsulates where we're going. So the plan, and I think your plan is exactly the same. You have a path, but sometimes the river flows in multiple directions as you continue on that path, right? Most assuredly. So don't be afraid with your plan when it has these changes, but just remember the goal is so necessary in the future, wherever you're going, right? You're going to some spot and the plan will carry you there. And I think it is important along the way to also listen to people that give you counsel, they give you advice, because you're not isolated. Even though you are your own teacher, you have to be open to other ideas, other thoughts, even criticisms, if I can put it that way, to let the plan ultimately unfold. And then you will see your goal in the future. You really will. And you know what they say? Critical thinking is excellent, especially if you're going to develop your plan, your mission, and critical thinking is great, truly great. You take care. God bless. Bye-bye. Hello, everyone. This is Leon here. This is the 28th day of our Camino journey. The weather was rather cooler today than it has been some of the other days. A little bit cloudy, kind of a nice walk. And we went between, of course, from last night, Villafranca del Bierzo do Las Herrerias. We're at the foot of apparently the largest climb, which will be tomorrow. So it should be an exciting day. So today we want to talk about planning. Planning. Now, planning is important in one's life, of course, because perhaps you have a goal, but how are you going to achieve that goal? And obviously, you're going to break that goal into small steps. So you are going to have to climb Everest, for instance, step by step. And our journey on the El Camino, for sure, required planning. We began to train 6 months ago, and then a month before we actually left, we bought the pack sacks, and we weighted them down. We needed boots that would be sufficient for walking 800 or so kilometers, because we have to walk, of course, another 100 kilometers to the sea. So let's say 900 kilometers. What kind of lightweight clothing? We needed a bit of perhaps a sweater and a blanket. So all of those things had to be planned. And then, of course, you have the problem of weight. And you'll find very quickly that people throw things away because it is just too heavy to go. And I think this whole trip is analogous to life in a way, isn't it? At the very beginning of life, when you gain consciousness at, let's say, 20 or so, you need a plan. So let's say you have a goal, whatever it is, and you plan for that goal, and you get started slowly but surely. Last night we spoke about my friend who attempted to become a doctor and found out that it wasn't for him. It doesn't matter because he was already underway. So many of us have goals, especially as young people, that are influenced by forces around us, our parents, our friends, society, etc. But once we plan and begin, we see, wait a moment, this is not for me. I need something else, something that's going to give me some joy in my life. I'm going to change. I cannot be a wage slave. Many years ago, I was a bit sick, and I stopped at a doctor's office about 7 or 8 o'clock at night, and they ushered me in rather quickly, and I began to speak with the doctor, and he had 2 daughters, and I had 2 sons, and he seemed to be quite engaging. So I said to him, "You must love being a doctor." And he looked at me with that 10,000-mile stare or 1,000-mile stare, and he said to me, "I hate being a doctor. I should have been a lawyer like my wife." And I said to myself, wait a moment. Here I have spent 6 or 7 years of my life training for something I just do not enjoy. It's not something I want to be. Don't do this. This is foolhardy, to say the least, because in this consciousness, whatever your religion, you have only one life. You're not revisiting this consciousness, this reality, in the same way. So you need a goal, of course, but you also need plans to achieve that goal. And what's nice about the plans is that the plans will show you the steps that are necessary, and very, very quickly on your journey, very like on the El Camino, many people quit. They say 35% of the people that begin in Saint Jean, Pied de Port, actually resign themselves to another day, or they do it piecemeal or whatever it is. So think about this, because Aristotle tells us, as I've said many times, we can access happiness in life, but it is truly up to me. Now back to Dave.
Yes, hello, Dave here. So, planning is very important. There's this saying, which is quite famous in computer science: a man, a plan, a canal, Panama. And I feel that when it comes to plans, as Leon said, it's important to have a plan, but it's equally as important to have a second plan or a third plan. I don't like to call these plans backup plan. I think the idea of the backup plan, it has a negative connotation. We're going about this as if we feel our initial plan is going to fail. And that's not the right way of looking at things. However, when we do make our plans, it's very easy to overlook some very small, minute pieces, which may cause us to fail. And that's where the backup plan, the second plan, our third plan comes into play. Just don't call it that. Don't call it a backup plan. For example, with our El Camino journey, Leon and I both went out and we bought these bags for our trip. And these were quality bags. As we're walking along the one day, we run into an Italian gentleman and he asks us, he says, "Is this a good brand of bag?" "Well, yes, it is," we say. And he's looking at our bags, wondering maybe he should have gotten these bags too. But what would have happened if mid journey our bag suddenly breaks? Leon's money belt broke, for example, and we were out of the city center. Lucky because he was able to find it on the ground, but at the same time, he wasn't able to get a replacement. And that's where this idea of a second or third plan comes into play. You need to think about the different things that could go wrong while setting up your plan and address these issues from the start. Anyone who has tried to set up a business has done this. And there will be things that you don't think about, problems and issues that come up, which then ultimately need to be addressed as well. And you just roll with the punches and figure out a way to solve these problems whilst trying to maintain the plan as much as you can. And if you get so off course and things aren't working out, you may have to pivot and figure out a way to tweak your plan just a little bit to make things work. But this is important. And I have this saying that I like telling Leon: anytime we get some idea that's different from our initial plan, I always say, let's stick with the plan. Because 9 times out of 10, your initial plan is tied in with your intuition. And therefore, any other seemingly tempting idea that comes about is probably not going to lead you where you want to go. Back to Leon.
So, just in closing, I think David's point of a secondary or tertiary plan is extremely important. For instance, all of us, I think, in life ultimately want to be contented. We want to be happy. This is the ultimate joy in life. And so when I was a young student at university many years ago, I studied philosophy and I had a certain plan what I was going to do with my philosophy degrees. But that plan did not ultimately work out. So I had to retrain myself as a print salesman, and I was ultimately successful at it. But it showed me that I could have a plan and I could ultimately succeed at what I wanted to do, which was to continuously learn as long as I live. This was my goal ultimately in life. So you think about this, make your plan. Now, the reason we recommend the notebook, because the notebook is not a diary and it's not a journal. It's my book of thoughts. Thoughts spontaneously come to me. Write them down and show that notebook to no one. Not your mom, not your dad, not your best friend, certainly. Why? Because they love you, of course. They love you and they will influence your plans, but your plans are your own. And you have, like we were talking about last night, you have to take responsibility for your plans. It's all a part of your life. No regrets. I'm not a victim. I'm a hero. Remember that. I'm a hero. Each of us deserves to be a hero, but it requires work. So think of your plans. So you take care. God bless. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Have a nice evening. Bye bye again.
Bye bye.